Hello and welcome to the 2020 edition of the Research Forum. The Research Forum is hosted by On Research, which is the research platform of EU Business School. I'm your host and moderator, Sudha Chakravarti. I'm the head of research at EU Business School. The Research Forum now, it's in its third year, and we are meeting in these exceptional circumstances, of course. And those who are joining us for the first time, the purpose behind hosting a research forum, which is the flagship research and outreach event of EU Business School, is to keep sharing content, build partnerships, continue the discourse on some of the most pressing issues, global as well as business. And as I mentioned, meeting in exceptional circumstances this year, and which means that nothing is more befitting as a theme than to talk about the unprecedented times that we live in and make sense of it. Truly, I think we can all agree that we will never forget in our living memories the year 2020 and the pandemic that has disrupted every aspect of our lives. However, despite these uncertainties as well as disruptions, there is a silver lining, and the silver lining is these disruptions and uncertainties also lead to innovative ways how we can better our lives as we come out of the pandemic. Therefore, in today's theme, which is Pause, a modern day catalyst for change, play, we will host three very interesting panels, and we will bring in speakers from a diverse range of expertise and experience. These panels will deliberate firstly on the issues of trade and collaboration and how we can actually prevent an economic downturn as we come out of the pandemic. After this, we will be discussing about big techs and small techs and the innovativeness or the continuing innovation that is happening around the world that is dealing with the pandemic and life after pandemic. And finally, I'll join you once again as the moderator for the last panel, which is continuity and financing. And we'll be looking at the future of work and how investments can flow once again to those areas of the world that need it the most. Before we get into the keynote speech, etc., just to give you some of the housekeeping rules. If anything goes wrong with Zoom, we are using Zoom. In keeping with the topic, pause, don't panic, restart and play. We'll be there. We'll make sure that it works. Somebody smarter than me, recently, I had this pleasure of hearing this. Many of you might already be familiar with the work of René Descartes and one of his famous quotes, cogito ergo sum, which is, I think, therefore I am. But we live in the times of Zoom, so it's covido ergo sum. So hopefully nothing will go wrong with our platform this morning and afternoon. So without further ado, before we start the panel, we have a keynote address on the state of the world post-pandemic. And this keynote address is delivered by none other than Dr. Raghavan Sitharaman, who's not a stranger to EU Business School. So Dr. Sitharaman, I will let you introduce yourself, of course, but he is not only highly regarded as a banking and an economic expert, but he is known for his erudition, his intellect, and his diverse and wealth of knowledge that he has on different fields. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Sitharaman as the keynote speaker. Dr. Sitharaman, you have the floor. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you, Sudha. What a generous introduction. The President and the faculty members of European University, honored guest, fellow panelists, distinguished invitees, my dear students. It's my pleasure and privilege to be integral part of the research forum. What an interesting time. Extraordinary set of challenges and changes. Perhaps we have to relish with the changing face of the world. The biggest discovery of this COVID-19 is human beings can alter their attitude and alter their lives. And that's what we have collectively resolved and showcased in the last 8-9 months. Conceptually, the recent outcome of IMF is interesting. A couple of days before International Monetary Fund has pronounced, the global contraction is limited to 4.4%, possibly. We will be recovering to 5.2% in aggregate terms next year, 2021. Advanced economies, grossly underperforming as on date, should be contracting to the tune of 5.8%, and possibly next year they should be reporting a moderate growth of 3.9%. Emerging markets and developed economies should be contracting to the tune of 3.3%, and projecting a growth momentum of 6% next year. That's on the belief that we will have clinical solution. We'll all get administered within the standard time. Extraordinary set of risk we have seen. One is the economic risk and governance. Second one is the human risk. Already we had 40.2 million people impacted. We lost over 1 million people. So that's a human risk, human cost we have paid so far. Environment risk and governance is a new telling story. The energy mix is changing, carbon neutral system is evolving, ESG reporting is coming up, sustainable development goals more than ever is contemplated as a necessity to create better world, better citizenship to this world. These risks, including the social risk, which we are maintaining on our day-to-day observations, social distancing, hygiene, healthcare, we are maintaining to make sure we are not at stake. Governed by different principle-centered values. At a global level, over 30 trillion has been pumped so far. The monetary and fiscal alignment, the central bank, the technocrats comes to money support, including Federal Reserve, kept on hold the interest rate till they achieve inflation. And every single central bank is aligning with the fiscal framework to make sure the debt servicing capacity of individuals and institutions are improving. The liquidity crisis is not moving into a solvency issue. In short, the solution to start with is to have remedial management. Number one, first R is remedial management. That is, from a disaster recovery, we have to move to business continuity. We have to make sure our solvency stays on. Business continuity comes into prospects. This is only an interim space. When it comes to setting up the right kind of sustainable development goals, United Nations have set eradication of extreme poverty, gender equality, again, global warming and climate change, healthcare for all, education for all, ensuring digital governance comes in, peace. Institutions are acting on truth in action, and build this global partnership to make sure we create a better world and better citizenship in this world. When it comes to corporate management, again, very similar commitment we need. Not only do we have shareholders' objectives, we have social risk management in the frame, and we will be governed by framework which are universally getting set as SDG goals, incorporated into our corporate mission and vision and execution. These are not ordinary developments. Let's understand. In addition to that, we have to remodel the complete business. It's a huge transformation in substance if you have to stay on. You have to redefine your personal life and professional substance are all getting changed. Extraordinary set of transformation is happening through digital governance plus. Social media tools are available today, Internet of Things, blockchain, artificial intelligence, robotic process automation are all telling today a new world order is sitting in and you have to get changed. That's a huge, rapid acceleration in terms of digital divergence. We have to change with that. We also seen rationalization as a structured principles. Your process, procedure, monitoring your consumptions, and ensuring we come to terms, lean and smart, when it comes to corporate management. If it is people rationalization, process rationalization, you need complete integration in terms of cost efficiency. And that's what the message we are getting. The circular economy in the world today is becoming flat. And that's what the lesson we have learned. Everything is smart. Everything is lean. Everything is efficient. That's the dictum today, the new world order, making world as a single integrated enterprise. And the possibilities are very many than the problems. The panacea, the medicines are more than the challenges. This crisis itself is an opportunity. That's the message we are resolving. This is not only the negativity which is pervading. The world is transforming. Mother Nature has been suppressed for too long. We have been taking this beyond compression. We are all debtors to the society. We use the land, we use the water, we use the sky, we use the mission. What are we giving back to society? Why we can't be settling our dues? Why can't we be ethical and moral? Setting individual discipline, that is why quarantine. Internally to drive. Internally to make sure you integrate your heart and mind as a human being to start with. Your infectious greed has to subsidize, and you have to be a human being to start with. Not only you have to create a better world, you have to create better citizenship to this world. That's the message we are getting it resolved time and again. What's wrong with it? Why can't we take it as an opportunity for us to redefine ourselves? Why can't we set in a principle-centered values for us to make sure we will be governed by principle-centered values? We will create a generation which is purposeful, meaningful for human consciousness. We will create a corporate mission which is corporate conscious. And we will set in a convergence. Unless you are a good person, you cannot create a good corporate. Unless you create set of good corporates, you cannot create good service to society. Unless you create good society, you don't create a nation. Unless you create good nation, you don't create United Nations. That's the need of the hour. That's the challenge posed in our premises. Add to that, we have to come to terms. For subsistence, we have to revenue enhancement, we have to look at it. That's another challenge. With world becoming flat, as I said, now you have bigger opportunity to look at aggregation of your services. It's one market, one integrated market. More than ever, we are interdependent. We recognize everything is virtual. That's the artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence. And that's what exactly we gather in this momentum. Look at the changing dynamics. I run a corporate in 20 countries. The changes and the challenges which I have gone through, of course we have gone through 2008 financial crisis. That was confined to liquidity. It didn't move into the solvency. The technocrats, we have learned lessons. Light switch regulation has failed, but we made sure we have clear governance in terms of risk and capital management. So when it comes to current level of changes and challenges, we understand every single business is getting redefined. Not only we have to give debt servicing capacity, ease of making business, competitive offering has to come in. We postpone the loans, we postpone the interest, and we are making sure we set in new world order to be more competitive, and your margins are falling when interest rates are lowering and your margins are equally falling. So you have to have additional source of enhancement to integrating your value system. No more you are part of the network, you are creating your own value chain. No more is customer relationship, it is customer experience and substance. No more marketing, it is real-time offers. No more it is a brick, it is a click today. Everything is changing, transforming. Your conventional wisdom has to be destroyed, set aside, come to terms with the conviction that this is a new world order, I'm going to innovate. I like the concept today. It is collaboration, innovation, concentrating on human dignity, human prosperity. And that's what exactly the trigger is all about. Transaction-based processing, all about digital advantage. Customer need the convenience, customer need the cost efficiency, customer we mean is time and his experience, whether wholesale or retail. Everything is becoming less cost. It means cost efficiency comes in. When it comes to liquidity management, a new set of definition crops in. The digital advantage we have, digital currency is stepping in, payment gateways are getting created, and technology companies and telecom companies today becoming financial services today. The convergence in terms of financial service. So there is a change in phase of the business. In market acquisitions are becoming normal, but the valuations of every asset class, the valuations are getting redefined. If there's an absolute diminution, whether you're an individual or an institution, whether you own a stock, whether you own a property, whether you own a fixed income bond, you are decelerating in substance. You hold a currency, it is getting decelerated. That's the complete contraction. Our net wealth is diminuting in substance. Nothing wrong with it. You have to necessarily realize social inequality was a major trigger. 1% of the population is holding 40% of the global net, trillions of dollars. Why should it be? We have nearly 7 billion people. We need to feed them. We have to give them minimum subsistence. We have to give them shelter. We have to give them education. We have to give them healthcare. We need to bring in a social order. That's what the dictum is all about. What a fine development this crisis is telling us. Let's learn from it. Let's understand the creative solutions we have within us. And that's what the integration is all about. We also understand financial markets were nothing but gambling ground. The greed, infectious greed has triggered this enormous amount of complications. That's why carbon emission was much more than what is required. Today, energy mix is changing today. People are getting into different combination of alternates. And that's the need of the hour. Again, factoring environment into trading. Today, everything is distributed through blockchain today. Solutions are available for you to integrate and make sure transparency, trust comes in. So all these changes are challenges. But if we adopt, if we understand this, these changes are nothing but opportunities. These challenges are nothing but opportunities. We are creating solutions within ourselves, and we are going to make sure we create better world and better citizenship to this world, as I said. And that is a purpose for our human endeavor. The purpose of living is to make sure we create a better generation than what we are. We have to necessarily make sure the 7 sins the Mahatma Gandhi has mentioned: wealth without work, science without humanity, commerce without morality, religion without sacrifice, politics without principle, wealth without work, are all miserable. We don't need it. We will bring trust. We will bring transparency. We will love humanity. We reduce our desire and the greed. We will make sure we will bring in equality. We will create a better world. We will also reduce our ignorance. That wisdom is continuously, the speed of wisdom is what the need of the hour. And that's what the purpose of our session is, I suppose, today. And that is what I want to offer you for the rest of the panelists to deliberate as a keynote. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind attention.
Thank you, Dr. Sitharaman, for this excellent keynote address. And definitely your keynote address seeks for humanity to revisit some of the ways that we conduct our activities or we understand life around us. And this pandemic has been an opportunity not only for us to get back to normal, but also to redefine ourselves in this new normal. So we can definitely do better and come up with different solutions and different ideologies, different principles of how we do our business as well as our activities. So once again, Dr. Sitharaman, thank you so much for collaborating and for this excellent keynote address. Any questions to Dr. Sitharaman, please do use the chat box, and we will make sure that Dr. Sitaraman receives them. Thank you once again for collaborating, and we will start with the first panel, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Judith Kozenkov, who is a professor of economics at EU Business School, and I will give her the floor. So we will start this in less than 30 seconds. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shuda, for the introduction. So, thank you very much also for giving me this opportunity to lead the first panel discussion on international trade. And our topic will be trade and international collaboration, avoiding an economic downturn. It's an interesting and the most important factor from an economist point of view as myself. For me, the trade is always and has been an indicator for the global economy and how the global economy is doing. And trade is one of the biggest parts or legs or pillars of the global economy. We have already seen the decline of global trade before the pandemic started, due to the trade tensions between the US and China and other countries. And also we'll see already the turmoil and all sorts of other turbulent events in certain regions, and the disruption of trade. It just was even further exaggerated with the pandemic. But the latest forecast of the World Trade Organization, the WTO, says that for this year we are expecting a 9.2% fall in merchandise trade, global trade, which is a little bit better than the forecast in June. So if we could be a little bit optimistic or start on that note, that might be a little bit of a better or more optimistic view on trade at this point. I have the honor to discuss it with our distinguished panelists, and let me welcome Philippe Nel, Honorary Ambassador of the Swiss Latin American Chamber of Commerce, also author and lecturer. Also Preeti Sinha, the CEO of FFD Financing for Development LLP. And last but not least, Katia Moreno, the Academic Quality Coordinator and Professor at the EU Business School Munich campus. So welcome. And I would like to give the floor first to Dr. Nel to start and talk about, I would like to first concentrate on the general state of the trade system and the trade relations. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me today to be on this third forum. And I like to start by saying that if you look at trade as a share of world output has grown significantly. It was 15% in 1989, and then it went up to 28% in 2007. But from that peak in 2007, we went back down to 22%. So we have been on a trend a bit down now since 2007, since the financial crisis. And indeed, if you look at the data before the financial crisis, trade was always growing faster than GDP. Trade was pushing up GDP around the world, and this is well understandable because the sectors in an economy which do trade are sectors which are very competitive, and therefore which have also a comparative advantage. And this has slowed down significantly since 2014. Trade in merchandise trade is growing as fast as GDP and no more. Now we have a very serious problem now. We have a few very serious problems which come all together. And this is why I think the situation is getting quite critical. First, as you just mentioned, the WTO just came up with, in October with a minus 9.2, a decline in trade for this year, which is a very serious, very serious decline. And this decline is also comes jointly with the decline of GDP on the worldwide by some 4.8%. This decline is quite strong because during financial crisis, for instance, the non-trade sector did not suffer that much, but now it is different, because it is the non-trade sector in particular which faces a strong contraction on the supply side. And puts that in a difficult situation for now. In addition, if you look at trade, you have the relationship between the two largest trading nations, the United States and China, which remains very tense and very difficult. You look at the data, under their bilateral trade, they have about 20% tariffs now on both sides, which is very high. And the WTO came up a couple of days ago with a first recommendation regarding to the US tariffs on 234 billion imports from China, and the WTO panel concluded that the USA are violating WTO rules. So in that sense, the climate is difficult, and I think that for the coming months we will have to continue to face some of these issues. On the one side, trade, which has been declining significantly, and on the other side, in terms of rules being applied, difficult interpretations which differ significantly between the key trading partners. The good news, we have also to look at some good news. The good news is that for next year, the WTO predicts, again, trade goes up by 7.2%, so that now we are in a difficult situation. And therefore, as was said by the introductory keynote speech of Raghavan Sirafaram, we are in a situation now whereby we have to review business models in order to adapt to this severe crisis, and then to see how we can come back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to give the floor to Preeti Sinha next.
Thank you. Just to introduce myself, I have a career in banking, both through investment banks and multilateral development banks. So I'd like to bring a financing angle to this discussion, which the Honorable Doctor has just started. And I wanted to thank the EU Business School and On Research, in particular, Mr. Suda, Mr. Ugo, and yourself, the moderator. So I would like to maybe share some slides just to speak through them. I thought it might give some context. So I'm just going to go ahead and share a presentation. Let me know if that works. So just to move on to the first, sorry. Yeah. So basically, I'd like to talk about the healthcare sector. I've had some recent experience in that, and in context of trade. So as COVID hit, the international supply of medical protection equipment, such as masks, wipes, isolation gowns, gloves, became very important to protect the frontline workers. So in this context, we saw, three behaviors, or we can imagine three scenarios. One is the stockpiling of such things by countries, companies, organizations. One is the international trade and how that played a role. And one is the investment into relevant manufacturing capacities. So on this topic, I'd like to refer all the audience to the WTO Ottawa Group recommendations on reductions of tariffs on pharmaceutical and medical supplies trade. I won't go into much detail because it's a whole domain to look into. But just to say this context, and I had some personal experience in working in this field. Transporting, let's say, masks from China to America where trade was needed. There was issues of obviously cargo flights, ships, container shipments, regulations, EPA, etc. Moving on. Then after the trade discussions, we would come to the supply chain discussions. And here I would just reflect this, this chart, which is from McKinsey Global Institute. And again, leave this big topic for those who are interested. I'd refer you to the great work done by McKinsey in their resilience and how the supply chains are going to change. Obviously, we know people are going to, the companies and countries are going to increase the number of places from which they source. There's going to be digital solutions to the trade. But basically, yes, the COVID was something that could not have been estimated, and the impact was very large. Coming to the numbers you mentioned, my estimates of the World Trade Center organization, they said that trade will fall between 13 to 32% next year. And the International Chamber of Commerce has warned that we will need about 5 trillion in trade credits, in trade finance to come back to the levels. So moving on actually to what I'd like to focus more on. This I like to call the resource mobilization landscape, where I am trying to tell you where is the money. You see that these sovereigns obviously are doing their bit, but beyond that, before the crisis and now, we have, let me here, which is where all the OECD countries come forward. Then you have the multilateral banks, you have the bilateral development finance institutions, you have blended finance. Then you have this great new category over the last few years of impact investors, and that's grown to 700 billion, who try to finance entrepreneurs. And then you have, coming to the private capital, because when you ask the question, where is the money? So beyond the ODA, the money does remain in the capital markets, where there's around 218 trillion of trades done every day. The asset managers, banks, big banks, own 85 trillion in their capacity to manage the money. Insurance and pension funds again manage 43 trillion. And basically, we would say that globally, private wealth in the hands of individuals and families is around 300 trillion. And here's a small sort of pyramid of the Credit Suisse global wealth distribution, which we all know is very concentrated on the top at 1%, with the 72% of world population owning only 3% of the wealth. So in this context, just keeping that in mind, trade finance as an investable class of assets is still quite nascent and has been challenged in these times of COVID. The universe is still small, and the total amount of global trade finance at, let's say, 6.4 billion is small compared to global equity, private equity at 2.5 trillion, global bank loans at around 800 billion, emerging market corporate bonds at around 680 billion, and investment in infrastructure and private sector at 240 billion. So we need to focus now on trade finance in this world to make sure we bring back some of that economic growth and stability. So reflecting back to the resource mobilization chart, what some of the multilaterals have done here, they have issued joint statements by about 6 multilaterals. So you'll see that the World Bank has issued about 14 billion in COVID crisis facility to its member countries. International Finance Corporation has created a $6 billion trade finance line. Asian Development Bank has a 20 billion support package with 2.4 billion for trade. EBRD has launched 2 solidarity packages, of which I believe about 1.5 billion has been for trade. And then the African Bank just approved a 10 billion rapid response facility and is providing 1 billion in trade out of that. Islamic Development Bank has a $2.3 billion facility for the 3 Rs, respond, restore, and restart. And the Inter-American Development Bank has a program where it's provided 1.5 billion to 3 billion for its member countries. There's the role of the DFIs. To take an example of just one bilateral, this is CDC, the UK-based development agency. They've come together to increase their funding for trade finance. They have entered into a new partnership with Societe Generale to offer more trade finance to Francophone West Africa. And they've bolstered their connection with the South African ABSA group to, again, through those banks, provide trade finance to people. And that hopefully involves SMEs and involves people involved in coming up with solutions or medical or pharmaceutical solutions to the current crisis. The banks are innovating. So this is the positive slide on banks, where somebody like an Abu Dhabi commercial bank has launched a pro-trade online channel. The ANZ Bank in Australia has brought in AI and machine learning into their trade finance. All of this is to help the creditworthiness, the risk assessment, and so on. The Saudi British Bank has been global finance best trade finance bank and has a supply chain finance initiative. And UniCredit has a trade finance gate to reduce the paperwork. There's also a lot of paperwork involved in trade finance. But coming perhaps to my last slide, while those were good examples, the big banks are struggling due to global banking regulations to provide trade finance where it's needed. There's too much of the Basel requirements, and the supply to the market is very low from the big banks. Therefore, we've seen three solutions, and here's where I'd like perhaps to encourage the audience, especially students, to think about trade tech and fintech. So basically what's happening is, at some points, alternative private credit providers are coming forward. These include people like Audentia Global, Ovamba, Countable. You may look these up, and they're being innovative. Then there's trade techs, where it's a marketplace, it's a way to connect buyers and sellers and provide the financing and the intermediation. That's a trade finance market. Trade9 and Comgo here in Geneva is based. And then fintechs like Banking Circle and VTrade, which is a consortium of 12 banks by IBM, to bring blockchain into this process. So I think I would maybe leave your focus on this slide and stop my screen and say that that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you very. Can you hear me? Yes. Sorry. Thank you very much for taking already or also this financing perspective to look at trade, and then I would like to turn the floor to Dr. Moreno. Next, please. We can't hear you. Sorry, we can't hear you. Or maybe it's just me, but yeah, now it's better.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Hello. Good morning,
yes,
everybody. I wanted to introduce myself briefly. My name is Katia Moreno. I am the academic quality coordinator in the Munich campus, and I am a professor as well for global economics and statistics here at the Munich campus. For this panel, I prepare some ideas related to the role of the World Trade Organization regarding the pandemic crisis. First of all, it is important to mention that the World Trade Organization is trying to support still the idea of acting as a forum where the different member countries can share their concerns about this situation. And a specific example I brought today is, at the moment they need to be, or they need to try to show the countries that it is important to prepare different measures. And one of those measures would be as an alternative measure for conformity assessment, regulatory compliance. That means that under these conditions, trade should continue. The most important part for the World Trade Organization is to offer transparency, first of all, and to attend to support their role of keeping supporting the countries, trying to give them support in order to say, we can still have trade, we need to have trade. However, the way the trade needs to be in the global economy needs to change. Therefore, certain measures have been taken, as I said before, measures for conformity assessment and regulatory compliance, or for example, they have included as well online tools for verification of certificates, remote inspections through videos links, and verification through the commentary analysis. And I think this is actually only an example related to the situation where we are facing at the moment. I thought as well that it is important to mention that since we know that tariffs need to be reduced, tariffs need to be more controlled, we need to keep fostering trade. But we know as well that in this scenario, countries are going to try to be, protective, let's say. So in other words, we're going to face perhaps a certain time of protectionism. And this is a situation where countries should be aware of this and should be prepared and start considering as well the role of government related to this. I think perhaps that one of the most important not perhaps a problem, but a thought that the World Trade Organization can raise is how far should governments need to be enrolled? First of all, trying to protect their national economies, but at the other side, trying to keep in mind that we still need to be globalized, that business models cannot be isolated. This is a huge challenge, first of all, because we were not prepared for that. Either member countries and non-member countries, we were not prepared for this. Yeah, transparency, it's perhaps a key word. First of all, exchange of information. And at the other side, social costs need to be taken into consideration.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the first round. I would like to propose one more round, and in the meantime, I also encourage our participants to ask questions in the Q&A or in the chat box. But until then, I'll ask another round of and then we can go around again in the same order. So my question would be, you mentioned, or basically all of you are touching upon a little bit the future trends and trends for the future in terms of also trade. So I would like to ask the question, how do you see the future in trade? What would be the biggest trend that affects trade? I think the digitalization or sustainability or other trends in development. So anything that you would say the biggest influencer in trade that comes in the future. Ambassador Nell, please, first.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, in terms of future trends for trade, as I told earlier, now trade is growing as fast as GDP at the world trade level, and I think this is going to continue for some time. What we see in trade, we have gone very far as far as we could really in trade liberalization with the Uruguay round and with WTO agreements, but now it has been difficult to go much farther, except the telecommunication agreement and some technology agreements, which were from the late 90s. And look at services, it is very difficult to move further in liberalizing services just because you touch some national policies, national regulation on education, for instance, on health, which are very sensitive in some countries. And what we see looking at the world trade for the future and looking at the WTO, we see that indeed the WTO requires some reforms now. Reforms are being discussed, but it is very difficult with such a large constituency of more than 160 members. And in the WTO, the members are the ones which shape the policies and which play the key role. So today you have some key issues such as the special and differential treatment, where some members, such as the United States, think that a number of developing countries should graduate from their special and differential treatment, while some developing countries do not want to do it. And you have liberalization of agriculture, which remains a very, very big stumbling block. You have fisheries subsidies, which do not progress and which require significant discussions. And you have also the appellate body. The appellate body, now the one of the strongest points of the WTO was its dispute settlement system, which enabled to keep a fairly strong discipline in world trade. And the example which comes right off the blue now is the panel decision on the US tariffs on China, 234 billion trade. China now cannot go to the appellate body, and therefore the US will be able to keep these duties as long as the US with China do not settle their trade dispute. And all this related to trade with China and the United States is also made more complex by the supremacy between China and the United States for technology, and for the second half of the 21st century. So we are in a very complex situation, but trade will go on. There's no question about that. Trade will continue to be a very strong aspect in all economies, but we have to take into account the challenges that we face right now. And I think digitalization is moving also trade forward. Digitalization is contributing to the growth of companies, of economies in a way that permits to be more efficient, to increase productivity, and therefore to increase also competitiveness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sinha, next, yes, please.
So I would resonate some of the points made earlier. For me, I think technology will be the biggest driver for trade in the future. You know, there's this now, the whole discussion about how companies and organizations are adapting to the new world. And again, let me refer you to the McKinsey Global Institute, but basically the findings are that companies are adapting, employees are adapting, there's a lot of remodeling going on. You know, how do you consider the time spent by employees on work and so on. However, what the companies with big supply chains obviously have to consider and are moving towards is they're holding more inventory, obviously, and they're trying to use technology to innovate their supply chains. Obviously, they will diversify to more countries. They will diversify their supply chains. And in that context, for instance, again, going back to the healthcare sector, do we see India's emergence as a stronger world pharmacy? You know, it is the biggest producer of generics in the world. Is it an opportunity for India to step up into perhaps some degree competition or to China to be another supplier? There's also Vietnam. Vietnam is a big manufacturer of goods and has now a new EU treaty. So there's a Vietnam-EU free trade agreement. Is Vietnam going to be one of the destinations manufacturers move to, companies move to for manufacturing? I see a lot of innovation in logistics, how logistics companies will move and how the dynamics will happen. I think there will be a lot of innovation there. And then coming back to the finance, so you see, we must encourage obviously local manufacturing as well to make sure economies pick up. But there is a gap of 1.5 trillion for SMEs trade finance, so that again needs to be fulfilled. And I'm a bit optimistic on those points I mentioned. I think purchase order financing, supply chain financing, these innovations are being brought by now new companies called, I would call them trade techs and fintechs. So I remain optimistic on that as the new growth area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Moreno. Sorry, we can't hear again.
Sorry, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. I would actually say as well, I would summarize more or less what Dr. Nell and Dr. Sinha said, because when we think about the state and the role of global trade, the first thing that comes to my mind is indeed the supply chains, the global supply chains, how they need to be reinvented. The interesting role and the important and challenging role of technology and digitalization, but as well logistics, and the logistics sector needs to be adapted to this new situation. And here, perhaps trying to look for alternatives by importing goods. Perhaps it is the time to rethink about what are the goods that in different countries at the current situation, for sure, in the medical sector and the agriculture industry. Those are the sectors that would need to be highlighted, and for sure, the role of logistics of the transport systems are going to play a decisive role during this crisis. At the other side, I would actually like to add as well the importance of key relationships within the different trade partners. Perhaps it is as well the time to rethink about the importance of caring better and more about key relationships. I mean, we know that global trade is important, and we know that we need to keep fostering this. It is impossible that we would assume that a country would like to stay isolated or would like not to be part of global trade. On the contrary, a lot of countries are keen to be part of an intensive global trade, and I mean, as we mentioned this before, we need to underline the decisive role of technology, definitely, of global supply chains. And when we think about global supply chains, we're not only talking about production systems, we're talking as well about transport, we're talking about communication. And with the remote work in this time, communication and soft relationships are turning more and more important nowadays. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I agree. So we'll see these different trends from different fields or different perspectives coming up in global trade. We have one question so far. So in the meantime, I encouraged, and it was already, I think, partly answered, but I would go with this question. How can the WTO enforce certain tariff and trade agreements on a national level, as it seems to fail to do that with countries such as China, India, Brazil, etc.? How can it also make sure that the WTO stays balanced in the political power shifts of the world, such as pro-US or pro-China bias? I think we already had a few links to that question, but I don't know if any of you would like to take the lead and answer this.
Yes, thank you. In my career, I was Deputy Assistant Secretary, State Secretary for Bilateral Economic Affairs for Switzerland, and I spent a lot of time at the WTO. In particular, I led the Swiss delegation for the accession of the WTO to China for the last 2 years of the negotiation, and been in many committees at the WTO. So what I would like to say is that the WTO is 164 members, but there are some members who have the largest share in trade, in world trade. And if you raise the point of power relations in WTO, as in other international organizations, the countries which have more power, which have more trade, which have more power, which are more important, indeed are going to play a much more important role. And this is a fact. And therefore, this is also why the United States plays such an important role in many organizations where they at times pay as much as 25% of the budget. And this goes hand in hand with their role in the world economy, and also in these international organizations. Now, the role of the WTO is to see that countries meet their obligations. Countries have rights and they have obligations. And therefore, if the countries do not meet their obligations, the issues are discussed in the committees. And you have many committees, and there are always discussions on many issues in the committees. And if no solution can be found on an issue, then a country may choose to go to dispute settlement. So this is the way it works. The WTO is not as an organization as a policeman. It's more an organization which is there to be the guardian of a very broad set of rules, which are also very, very precise, and to get the opportunity of the countries to discuss these rules and also to improve these rules over time. So this is what I want to say. And I just want to add a couple of words on value chains, because value chain has been raised a couple of minutes ago. And here I would like to say that value chains are very important today, and they will remain very important tomorrow. Value chains were about 30% of the value of exports for many countries in 1995, 30% and 40% now in 2011, and at this stage right now. But what I want to say is that value chains now are also under very high pressure because of the COVID-19 crisis. And I give you an example of the Swiss watch industry. The Swiss watch industry's exports have declined now from January till September this year by 28%. But look at value chain. The Swiss watch industry imports a lot, bracelets, boxes, and so on. And the value chain of the Swiss watch industry, its imports have declined by 40%, and by 48% from China. This means that the risk we have now is that many of these suppliers around the world are just cannot deliver anymore, and they are going to face liquidity and then solvency also issues. So this crisis should not last for too long, because otherwise the value chains which work well are going to be endangered. And then it's going to be even more difficult to pick up again when the recovery will really start, because now nobody really knows when the recovery can really start. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we can quickly take the last question. We have one more question, and it is about the healthcare and trade. So the question is basically the French president's comment on less reliance on global providers like China for health equipment or goods, and start to manufacture them in France. So the question is it something feasible with the current situation and technologies? Have you seen concrete steps that European countries are doing to be more independent in this sector? Is it only a political discourse or something, or a tangible direction to move forward?
Well, I can tell you in Switzerland, we have companies who used to produce textiles, and now they are producing masks with textiles. Mm-hmm. So there is a move. There is certainly a strong move taking place. The dependency towards China was extremely high, and it led to great difficulties in March and April. But the market, not the countries are deciding what to be produced. It is a market. And now the market sees opportunities there, and indeed, there is not only a reshoring from China, which has been accelerated by the US-China trade war, but also now the market sees opportunities and therefore seeks them, and is going to produce more of this protective equipment here in the Western world.
Thank you. Preeti, if you, would like to.
Actually, my point is more generic in the sense I think the world is going to go more local. We must now start to maybe build around our local communities. I see a shift which maybe exists beyond the crisis. So then in that context, I think, yes, local production must be encouraged. However, you must keep in mind the big competitive advantages of large-scale production, low labor cost, etc. So I think it's a very intense strategy that countries have to engage in. It's not sort of an easy question. Of course, the current response on the equipment, personal protection is fine, but I think it's something of deep reflection for the EU countries as well. But I would say encouraging local production would be a good thing for economies.
Thank you. Dr. Moreno, would you like to also add something as our last concluding sentence?
Yes, actually perhaps a short reflection when we are saying that markets need to be flexible, as Dr. Nell mentioned. that companies that were used to be involved in the textile industry, they are producing masks nowadays. So this is only a reflection of how resilient actually different sectors need to be, first of all. At the other side, what I want to add, I think it's important to mention human solidarity as well during this crisis, this pandemic crisis, because indeed, when we talk about global supply chains, when we talk about supply chains, we would actually need to think, especially, for example, in the agriculture industry, how far this crisis is going to take care of trading in a more solidary way. I think we would actually need to consider as well this aspect, especially in global trade.
Maybe just to add
Thank you very much. Yes.
The pharmaceutical and healthcare, as the last speaker mentioned, a bit open in terms of tariff. Maybe WTO needs to address this as a special case on human solidarity. What should be the case of tariffs on that?
Yeah, exactly. That's yeah.
Exact. Well, I think that was already a nice conclusion, and our time is ending. So I would like to thank you very much for all three of you to share your experience and expertise and ideas on global trade. Hopefully, we'll see a more optimistic scenario coming up for this year, and a quicker recovery than right now we are expecting from next year. So we'll see. And thank you very much for participating. Thank you very much for all three of you. We'll continue with our next panel in just 30 seconds. So I will give the floor to our next moderator and panelists to continue. So 30 seconds of break, and we'll continue with the next panel. Thank you very much for everyone already for listening.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third edition of the Research Forum. If you're having a lunchtime meal while you're watching this session, bon appetit. We'll be joined by the rest of the speakers in a second. Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. For those of you that are just joining, the theme of the Research Forum this year is Pause, Play, a modern day catalyst for change. Our session today is looking at big tech, small tech, safe tech, innovating to stakeholder value. We're living through the early stages of the fourth industrial revolution with exceptional tech growth, and it's exciting because we're opening up to a world of possibilities and potentially even worlds of possibilities and opportunities. This is important because we can potentially solve more of the world's problems and in principle make the world a much more interesting place to live in. Competition for scarce resources has historically driven tech advancements, as we've always sought to do more with less. And the world today isn't much different in that sense. Whether you're thinking about a big tech company or a little innovative startup, value is usually defined by the need to do better with less. During the discussion today, we'll think about the evolving tech and digital ecosystem. We'll get some exclusive, if I must say, insights on how businesses and individuals are defining and plugging into this landscape, as well as some insights into how we should be thinking about safety going forward. And to join us on this discussion, we have an excellent lineup of experts that I'm happy to introduce now. I'll start with Alain Schnuley, who is the Managing Director of BCG Platinion in Singapore. Martijn van der Ven, who is the founder and CEO of Athelus. Just give everyone a wave so they know. Thank you. Mohamed Ba, or MOBA, who is the Senior Coordinator for Digital Innovation Ecosystems at the International Telecommunications Union. Taisa Thierry Chavez, who's the Managing Director and Chief Catalyst Officer of Y Coaching and Consulting, and Velislava Petrova, who is an innovation consultant working with the UNAIDS, the World Bank, and other institutions. Thank you all again for joining us. One of the key lines from earlier today is a quote from Dr. Sithariman, who gave the keynote in the morning, and he said, "Everything is smart, everything is linked." I want you to think about that, you know, going into this discussion, and this is to the participants. I want you to think about that going into the discussion today, because we're really moving into a world where everything is connected and everything is linked. Now, jumping straight into it, stakeholder value is a broad term. I mean, the theme of that could extend from your shareholders to your suppliers and ultimately to your customers. After what we can all agree is an unprecedented year, we would like to start by sort of getting a sense from each of the speakers what shareholder value has meant to you. And we'll start with Alan Schnuley, who I believe is at 7 p.m. in his day. Thanks for joining us, Alan. Please tell us, what is shareholder value for you?
I think a lot of companies are going on the innovation as we speak, right? And what we've seen is that to maximize their potential and rebound, yeah, after this crisis, they are investing heavily on digital, yeah, definitely to engage customers much better, to be able to harvest data in a much better way, yeah, and so on. So I think we see the companies that are going to make a difference, and not all companies are going to make a difference. Let's be clear, are the ones who are able to actually bring together, yeah, the human aspect, which is the organization, the ways of working, and so on, and the technology. And those who do that will be able to innovate faster and will come out stronger out of this crisis. And we see that happening day in and day out. And this is a big differentiator because everybody is transforming. They have no choice. Yeah, working from home is a reality for many companies, so they need to adapt. But not all companies have necessarily the leaderships and the skills to do that at speed. So the ones that are going to make a difference to their employees, to their customers, and their shareholders are the ones who are going to be able to harness both sides.
Thank you, Alan. I agree. You know, this is really, we're going into what we can call the new normal, and the companies that will make a difference are the ones that can truly sort of harness the as you said, both sides, but also, you know, really invest in data and take advantage of the opportunities that it presents. I'll go on next to you, Martijn. What is stakeholder value for us? And thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Hugo, and of course also fellowship in this panel. We all know that, and I want to share something. I feel a little bit that we have something, of course, all around the globe in common, and that's, let's call it a refugee crisis for all of us. We have no flexibility in a way to meet each other, although we wish to. We want to meet colleagues in the offices. We want to share the link, you know, between each other, and I think that is the biggest asset of what is happening now in our society. Is the human capital will make the difference in the digital revolution. So my opinion is that as a shareholder of my own company, as a major shareholder, together with my fellowship shareholders, is like Alain said, is you cannot hide and seek and leave the transformation behind you, or you go bypassing it. You have to be part of that. And I think to address already something about Atalos, I think we are building a unique ecosystem, which is a voice cloud system that connects everybody around the world in a big citizen connectivity platform. So we try to help enterprises, charities, NGOs, small tech, big tech, you know, it's not important what is the volume, but it's about the impact and to give everybody connectivity. And this is the reason why Atalos was lifted up in the past years to focus, to help others who are in need. And I also heard it already during this morning when I met in the conversation with Priti Singha. It's about social entrepreneurship. You know, for me, I feel more comfortable with that part, although we are a commercial driven company, and as shareholders and future shareholders, we would like to create an impact, but keep the ethos very much in line, the moral very much in line, but we are seeking for partnerships and co-creation. And I think that these two parts are, for me at least, most important to enable our society that needs desperately connectivity. Like we have this Zoom conversation, you see, as we all know, there's a big pressure on bandwidth. Okay, how can we build niche platforms to support these kind of possibilities to somebody in the south of Africa or in the Far East Asia? So building that ecosystem is asking shareholders to commit, to trust, and to be confident about the security to roll out such an ecosystem in partnerships. And this is my open arms as well to the world. We seek for operational, strategic, and commercial partnerships with people that are believing in the next decade that we have to resolve matters together in this digital revolution.
Thank you, Martijn. It's great to hear you talking about operational partnerships, because that's really sort of the direction that I think stakeholders should be looking towards, because it brings benefits for everyone, you know, for those on sort of the receiving end, but then also for the entities that come together to build solutions. Thank you for that. Next up, we'll check with Mo. Mo, would you please tell us what stakeholder value is for you?
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. I just want to pick up on what Alan said, which is to say, from a private sector, yes, it may be about shareholder value, and building on what Martijn says, to say, okay, but it's really about that ecosystem of partnership, or actually say partnership in the ecosystem, as I like to call it, not necessarily an ecosystem of partnership, but partnership in the ecosystem. But from one of you, as ITU being the lead UN agencies for the ICTs, what we like to think about ultimate stakeholder value is basically what potential, what economic potential are you unlocking for the communities that your solution or your project or your initiative goes into. And if we step back from that definition of stakeholder value, which is the community of the buyer or the people, the recipient, if you step back, then you think about who are the stakeholders in this ecosystem that needs to come together. And the way we like to think about it is you have policymakers, you have the innovators, which are the entrepreneurs, of course. We have what we call the ecosystem builders or the entrepreneurial support network. We have the financiers, we have the academic. And so we have a group of people who, with our collaboration, you cannot start thinking about unlocking this value. I'll stop there, but just a last comment about your early introduction, which is to say everything is connected today. I would beg a bit to disagree with that, is that everything may be connected in some ways, but if you talk about the developed world, that may be true for many, many things. But if you talk about the developing world, there is a lot of things that are not connected and may never be connected. And the fourth industrial revolution is, you know, we are at the fourth industrial revolution. People have gone through the third industrial revolution and the second industrial revolution. Many of these communities are still not benefiting from this industrial revolution. So what's going on? Where is this innovation gap, and how can we close that? Back to you, Hugo.
Thank you, Mohammed. That's an excellent segue into Taisa, who works very closely with individuals.
Thank you. I'm having so much food for thought here. Thank you for having me. So I picked up on different things, and one in particular, speaking about stakeholder value, I think it really goes down to human relations. And we see a big paradox here. We have more and more remote and more distant. And so how can we connect more? And I think one of the things that is really important for companies right now is asking themselves, how can we implement this digital culture with our companies? Because digital culture and digital leadership, most of the companies have had to pick up so quickly and step up, okay, and build this ecosystem to allow the employees to perform the job in a sustainable but as well in a human way. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges right now. So how can we keep connected and have this closeness when we are so distant? So that's one thing. And because that's one of the things I do, you know, advise companies on, you know, how to be better digital leaders. I came up with the definition because I couldn't find one that really suited me. And digital leadership is about, you know, culturally transforming not only the management, but the entire company, and developing not only the skills, because everyone talk about skills, but also the behaviors that will allow for sustainable performance and more human performance. And I wrote down his name because not easy. Dr. Sitaraman talked about humanity. And I think it's really about humanity and how you connect. So coming back to stakeholder value, I think that if you don't keep in mind that people, and I'll talk about this a bit later, are fearful for the present and for the future, and how you can bring, you know, a certain sense of reassurance in this digital economy and digital supremacy, and bring more the human values back to the companies and back to the customers, and have in mind the customer centricity, the future of the digital transformation, as we call it, it's not as sustainable as people want us to believe. So I'll say that for the start.
Thank you, Taisa, for that. I think it'll be interesting to hear, you know, with some of the comments that you've all raised, it'll be interesting to hear what you all think about things like how we plug the innovation gap and how we reassure people about sort of the technologies that they have to grapple with. I'll move on to now Velislava, who will also present an interesting perspective on stakeholder value with the organizations that she works with. Velislava, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's actually see that there's such synergy in our thoughts, and I've been really reflecting on some of the points that the others said because they're key for us as well. I think what I would like to start with is that we can't bring value without understanding needs. And for us, it's really interlinked. Value is dependent on needs, knowing them, mapping them, asking the right people what their needs are. And for us, trying to bring value to populations living with HIV or generally to improve health access is really been important to put together the right innovations that are able to bring impact, but in a sustainable way, not just provide a solution without knowing what the gap is, but then also provide the right kind of funding, because for a long time we've seen this really high risk perception of developing market or developing countries with very poor understanding of how impact can be brought there. So I think a lot of the value to health and to people requiring higher access to health will come from that ability to bring together the different parts of the puzzle, the different stakeholders, to align their visions and create a nexus that provides a way for all of them to work with the required kind of incentives for them, but in the same time with the ultimate vision to improving health equity. And that's the kind of intermediary role that we've been taking at UNAIDS.
Thank you, Velislav, and thank you to all the speakers for these contributions. The common thread that I've pulled from all your definitions of stakeholder value is that the individual is at the center, whether with regards to benefiting from a solution or benefiting from company's offerings as shareholders. In the end, the technology, the innovation, the ecosystem is built around the individual. We'll go into a bit more detail now in the discussions, and I'd like to start with a question for you, Mohammed. The ITU's Global Innovation Forum for 2020 will be held next week with the main theme, Unlock Your Digital Ecosystem's Potential. What can you tell us about the key themes and discussions that have been planned for this forum, and why have you chosen these key themes at this particular moment?
Oh, thank you, Igor, for that question. What we're looking to do, as we know, the world has changed after COVID, and what we see is that a lot of communities were left struggling. For the communities who are doing really well, who are digitally connected, they were able to survive, but Zoom is not the answer to our education system. Zoom is not the answer to our healthcare system. You actually need real solutions addressing real problems, Velisva said, I guess. For this to happen, we need to bring the problem owners, the solution owners, and the resource owners. And this is what we have done, is we have architected a whole week where we're basically bringing the problem owners, the solution owners, and the resource owners so they can actually understand what happened. And we're bringing in many countries, for example, where we have our ecosystem builders, which could be a policymaker, a financier. They're really people who sprung into action to try to solve the problem of their community. That's what the forum is about. And that's so the main teams is about really mainstreaming your digital ecosystems so that you can help other sectors of the economy. And one of the sub-team of that is really mainstreaming entrepreneurship, because you go in many developing countries, everybody wants to have their Silicon Valley, but not everybody can have their Silicon Valley. There needs to be a clear understanding of the potential of the economy, and then to focus those problem owners, solution owners, and resource owners to really address this. And back to people, and the people are at the center of all this. So this is what we're looking for.
Thank you. Thank you, Mo. I'm sure we'll come back to that at some point to see how, you know, we could potentially take some of the learnings and insights from the discussion today and hopefully transmit these into the discussions that you have. Martijn, tell us a bit about Athalos. It was created, or it has created, a unique voice ecosystem that enables connections around the world. How does this work, and how can a company like Athalos play a role in sort of helping to shape the digital world?
Thank you for this question, and Mohammed, thank you also for your, let's say, regie into the ITU platform. We are also an ITU member, so we know you do a lot of work over there to guide and navigate the digital revolution in the boundaries that is important nowadays, to secure a trusted network, but also to put people in place and to empower them. And I think that's a bridge to Athalos. We believe on our side that we are humanizing voice again through our voice ecosystem. Okay, so for us, when we started this journey several years ago, we found out that personally myself, I had a lot of hassle to find fundings, or to have connectivity in an independent way, or to create a closed user group to connect anytime, any place, anywhere. So beside nowadays the fintech or the tech solutions, like I was mentioned before, like Zoom or any other online portal, that it makes it visible to have a conversation, we brought it back to nature. So humanizing voice is for us kind of an ethos to achieve and to help others to find fundraising through our voice ecosystem. So I would like to share a couple of, let's say, examples. If you are an NGO and you just need a connectivity because you need a phone number because you want to be reachable, we give it to you. So that is free of charge. The user is paying for that who is dialing, very simply. It's like an international service number, which makes it possible you're able to be contacted. You will get from us a, let's say, standard interactive voice response system where you can put your engagement on to tell your story online and to share the story, but also to get connected to the staff of your NGO. And in the meantime, there's a pay per minute over the line through all the operators, through the carriers, to collect the call, and this is be done by Atalos. So we see our platform as a platform of platforms. Okay, it is important with rolling out 1 billion numbers on an international code which is called plus 87810. I want to bring back the stakeholdership. Stakeholder is key to continue this journey, what we are doing, to engage, but also to enable the complete network in our society on many levels. So these are the operators, these are the service providers, but this is also you and me. And I think, let's say our focus within the next 5 years, up to 10 years, is to give access to everybody around the world that needs help. But also for enterprises to make it much more easy to be reachable with lower cost, because this is also part of reshaping the future. And I would like to refer to Kevin Kelly, who is a famous author, who wrote a beautiful book. It's called The Inevitable. And the inevitable is going into 12 forces of nature in technology shaping the future. And we are one of them. It's called accessing. So accessing information, accessing streaming media, accessing need for now, because you need a hotline, because there was a big crisis somewhere in Asia, and normal operators are not reachable. We give you the hotline, so countries are reachable, humanitarians can help there, and this is where we believe in. So for us as a future ecosystem, because we are still building it, it's a marathon. But for now, I want to say, as a software as a service, it is important to use infrastructure, to use corporations on many, many levels. And I think entertainment and amusement is also important. But at the end of the day, for me as a stakeholder and shareholder, working with global partners to embrace possibilities like we are offering as Atalos is the partnership that we seek enabling parties. And I hear that already in this conversation. And of course, I look forward to work with you all to see how can we solve matters and to have a call to action now, because this is the time.
Thank you very much, Martijn. It's great to it's sort of great to get a sense or understanding of how the Atalos model works, connecting people and some of the applications. Those examples were great, you know, to see the different applications of your system. I'll have a question now for Thaisa. You work closely, and I mentioned earlier that you work very closely with individuals in your work to bring them into the digital space. There are numerous technologies to grapple with and even more ways to sort of apply and combine these. How are the individuals that you work with thinking about the digital world?
All right, so I have, do you hear me? Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I have so many things to say, so I'll try and be concise, so I'll leave room for the other speakers. First of all, I'll start saying I'm an ambassador for the Impact EI Foundation, working around, you know, building an artificial intelligence that lays grounds for a more sustainable humanity. And the mission of the foundation, and I'll say that because it's very much linked to individuals, and we are, you know, connected, you know, in ways on how to bring this into the workspace, to bring a more ethical, robust, and legal artificial intelligence. And why is that important? It's because, again, I'm always thinking in terms of, you know, how the employees and the employers can bring a more human experience. Everyone talk about human capital and how it can be more human to human relationships. But in fact, actually, it's not happening that much. So my clients and the individuals that I coach and I do consulting for, their question is, how can it really translate into more human relations, and how technology can actually help catalyze this? So one of the things, and I wanted to mention this, and not so many people talk about it, is the fear factor. The fear factor that technology has really accelerated in the last 10 years, that we are not enough. we as employees, we don't know enough. There's so much that is expected from people, okay? And there's not enough training and not enough, knowledge of technology, because technology, every day there's a new technology, there are new platforms. So I think mental health as well is another topic that needs to be addressed, because people are required to be connected all the time. They are not given the right perspective about technology. Technology as an enabler, not technology as a threat. And so many people talk about artificial intelligence as a threat to their jobs. That is because there's a lot to do in terms of communications, and as well in terms of design of the technology now and for the future, because that's what's happening right now, to enable those human connections and have more augmented humans the way we imagine them. Not just more performance, not just more technology will push people to be more performant, but technology will allow for more well-being within companies. When you look at some countries and some companies, they are thinking in terms of, oh, wow, we can have 4 days a week and be as productive. And we don't need to be connected all the time. We don't need to be as bounded to technology. So the fear factor right now, I would like companies to address that, because it's bringing lots of consequences in terms of mental health. And this is going to have a huge cost for companies, because people cannot work on the tense mode all the time. Like, I need to be on, I need to be connected, I need to provide for my company. What's in it for them? How can you make their lives better? And another point, and maybe I'll leave it up to that, is that, for instance, artificial intelligence is seen as a provider for more we are going to tasks that are not with added value, we're going to remove them. But actually human beings need those tasks because it's part of the routine, and our brains cannot function on this tense mode all the time to produce and to perform. So my quest with my clients, and as well in a more broader perspective, is how companies are going to tackle this topic of technology really bringing more well-being to the employers and to the employees, and how can we, as not only companies but as a society, have this understanding that technology is a catalyst for a better way of living, a more sustainable way of living.
Thank you, Thaisa.
I'm very passionate about this topic.
That's great. That's great. Thank you for bringing your passion to the discussion. So what we can see so far is that we have the individual sort of at the center, and then there's a few different dimensions to which we can look at the individual. So on one hand, if we take it literally, looking at the theme, there's big tech, which is helping individuals around the world connect, but which is also allowing us to sort of harness data and get a better understanding of populations. There's the small tech, which is helping individuals individually or at the personal level. Now we'll look at another, which we've touched on a bit already when Velislava spoke the first time, but we'll go into a bit more detail now on another dimension of this interrelationship between the individual and technology. So for you, Velislava, and the programs that you work on at the World Bank and UNAIDS, I can imagine that you're most excited by innovations that directly improve health outcomes like data visibility and access to service for vulnerable populations. What are some of the innovations today that are keeping you excited?
Well, I think if I can add to the title, big tech, small tech, safe tech, I think it's possible tech in our case. Very often you see what is possible to actually be implemented in the countries where we work, what's possible in a global south context, what is the required infrastructure that can adopt this technological innovations. Otherwise, the theme that we see are the same as many of the other speakers have discussed. We see a lot of digital solutions coming into the healthcare sector, telemedicine, telesurgery, ways to optimize the kind of management of hospital systems through digital solutions, AI in the diagnostic sector, again in the optimization sector. The benefit there that's been seen is on several levels. One of them is their ability to repurpose very quickly. And we've been seeing this a lot with AI diagnostic solutions that were initially developed, let's say, for tuberculosis or cancer, and now are really quickly repurposed for COVID, because where repetition is hard for people to concentrate, actually for AI, the more data you provide for a different context, you can quickly repurpose it to something else. And we've seen such examples there. So they are really exciting. Also, another areas that we need to see more, and I think was touched upon in the previous panel, is about local ownership and local production. The areas where we really see take up and scale up of solutions are areas where you can produce them locally. And we've seen that kind of, we facilitate that kind of partnerships, for example, with safety syringe production company that managed to set up the entire manufacturing in Africa. This allows not only to get local ownership to create economic opportunities, but also really to bring that sustainability. And the other area as well that we've been seeing that digital solutions are helping are areas where we try to solve the lack of human resource in the healthcare sector, or the very centralized way in which healthcare systems are built, where you really have no healthcare capacity at the margins of kind of outside of big cities. And that's something that digital solution can solve if we manage to solve some of the challenges. One, this education and people being comfortable and happy to use the technology and know how to do it. But the bigger ones that we've been seeing actually is that in order to solve challenges in health, you end up having to solve challenges outside of health, which are to do with connectivity and electricity. Around 2/3 of hospitals in Africa, and particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, don't have access to electricity. So any fancy technological solution, whether it's big tech or small tech, cannot actually be deployed unless you have the required energy and connectivity infrastructure to deploy that. I'd never imagined, as someone who is specialist in the health sector, that I had to talk to people in the low orbit satellite sector, or people who are in the area of sustainable energy solutions and solar panels. But actually, in order to provide health for individuals in a sustainable manner, where they actually can have solutions that are deployed longer term, you need to solve that underlying infrastructure issues. And that's why I think all that excitement that the digital transformation, in particular the healthcare sector, is creating needs to really be coupled with understanding that we cannot deliver and bring value to people unless we solve the barriers that this digital transformation is revealing to us. And maybe with COVID more than ever before, we see that, because you can't have a cold chain to deliver a vaccine unless you have electricity to do that. You can't have monitoring of cases and no matter how good tracking systems you have, unless you have the connectivity that requires that. And all of these really key components, the same diagnostics, the really key components of solving a health challenge as an epidemic of this kind can be solved with the current technologies and innovation that we have. But in order to deploy them in places where probably the needs are the highest and the gaps are the greatest, we need to solve a lot of underlying issues. And that's why this concept of understanding the need and then realizing how many people need to come in a common partnership in order to solve this. And a lot of the challenge really of this translated is lost in translation between what needs to happen, where does it need to happen, what is needed for it to happen. So I think the excitement is huge. And the solutions are enormous and the potential is huge, but we really need to work together to be able to create the best enabling environment for it to bring the value that is able to bring.
Thank you, Velisa. It's really interesting that you sort of highlight that, because it also ties into what Mo and Martijn have talked about earlier. You know, on one hand, operational partnerships really are the opportunity to get all those stakeholders together to build the supporting health systems, because as you said, you can't have a cold chain system in place if there's no energy to support it. You can't collect data in the field if there are no cell towers around. So, you know, bringing all these different partnerships together. And then I guess, you know, the Global Innovation Forum is the perfect place for discussions like that to happen. So from all the discussions so far, you know, there's a few things that I'm hearing, and one of them is that the digital world is expanding and the lines between digital and physical are blurring, but at the same time, there are still a lot of questions that we have to answer. There's still some gaps that we need to plug to really sort of maximize the stakeholder value that technology and the innovations that we've all mentioned offer. All of this sort of gets me thinking about something that I can imagine is at the forefront of all our minds, and, you know, at the forefront of many people's minds, which quite a few of you have already mentioned, and that's sort of digital safety and cyber security. And this takes me to the next question to you, Alan. So how should we be thinking about designing a secure digital landscape? I mean, in a practical sense, what are some of the themes that you would expect to be discussed at the ITU's upcoming innovation forum, for example, with regards to safety online and cybersecurity? And of course, I recognize that the term or the phrase cybersecurity and the term safety online has many different meanings for different people in different industries, but I'd like to get your thoughts on this, Alan.
Well, I think one of the things you need to be very well aware of is what are the assets, yeah, that you have, you want to protect. And it's different by industry. If you talk to a government organization, they're going to say all assets are important. People, buildings, data, whatever. If you talk to a bank, it would be different. The telco would be different. So understand well your assets that you want to protect, and then embed the security from a design perspective at the very beginning. And this is what we see a lot, is that a lot of companies leave it as an afterthought, yeah? And then because it's not a question of if, but when you're going to get hacked these days, or you're going to have an issue. So then dealing with this after the fact is a pain. And the exposure and the risk, as we said before, is increasing, yeah? Because as you said, people need to connect, yeah? Need to connect to the ecosystems, or more and more embarking, leveraging cloud services, for example. So the risk and the exposure is greater than it used to be, let's say 15 years ago, right? So, but it brings also a lot of opportunities. So be very well aware of those risks and really embed this into the design. And also, as I said before, is also the challenge is the human challenge, because anything can be solved with technology. You need really to have the senior leaders of the company who are setting the directions, yeah, and the strategy, really well aware of that aspect. This is not a technology matter from our point of view. Cybersecurity or security, it is really a business concern. And if it's taken at the highest level, then this is how you can actually get funding and do the right thing for your assets. And the assets could be the people, could be your buildings, could be your technology, could be anything. Yeah.
Thank you, Alan. So first of all, you know, when thinking about, as Alan said, when thinking about cybersecurity, understand your assets. And of course, this varies, as he's rightfully mentioned, this varies from industry to industry. I can see that our participants have put some questions in the comments. Please, you know, keep sending in those questions. I'll just take one of the questions here for Taisa, and then also open it up to other of the panelists who would like to contribute. So Taisa says, you mentioned that as part of digital leadership of digital leadership, behaviors should need to embrace a sustainable performance. Can you give an example? Can you give an example of this, or maybe just briefly develop on the idea of how behaviors can embrace a sustainable performance?
Well, thank you for this question. So I saw the question actually, and I was thinking about that while listening to you all as well. I think it's very much to do with the vision at the top. So that's one of the things, like, it's not about skills only, it's about behaviors. You can have as many trainings as you want in companies, and actually there are companies who are really good with, you know, continuous training and continuous training. And at the end of the day, what happens is that if there's no vision at the top and it's not sustained by a culture of innovation, of risk-taking, where failure is celebrated as well, where you help people get away of this fear factor I was mentioning, again, the behavior. People are scared to take risks. You tell them, yeah, you innovate, please take risks, do, you know, think out of the box. And at the end of the day, they want to keep their jobs. So let's be very concrete here. And people are afraid to take risks, and there's no environment implemented for collaborators to embrace, you know, sustainably this. So the consequence on performance is really high. People are scared. And when we are asking to digital leaders to anticipate and as well to take a step back, that is very hard because there's so much being thrown at them. And you were mentioning stakeholder value. You know, we want people to do more and produce more and bring more value to the company in terms of money, not only in terms of, you know, talent retention and talent attraction. And I think right now, one of the key, you know, aspects is not only, you know, having this vision at the top also, but I'll talk about as well organizational dynamism. And as I read this research by Gartner, I have it here, top performers had one thing in common. That was the biggest predictor of success, that is organizational dynamism. And I think that is has a huge impact on performance. When you allow this and you build this environment, that changes completely the scope and allow, combined to the vision at the top, for people to feel more reassured, take away this fear factor and think, you know, whatever, I will bring this culture of risk and error to the company and allow for the safety net so that people feel reassured that when they make mistakes, that is very much linked to the culture of innovation. You know, you cannot innovate if you do always the same thing, the same causes, the same effects. So I think that it has really much to do with the digital culture that companies are really trying to accelerate in regards to COVID. And that is so hard to do because when you think about culture in companies, it's been there for so much time. So it's a big challenge.
Hugo, may I please,
yes, please go ahead.
add to Thaisa her great, let's say, wordings and powerful speech. And I think this is one of the comments as well of Mr. Subar Anwar Bhavani, who is part of our team, who we have appointed to lead our global partnership direction. Because social entrepreneurship is important to brief what is really happening between partnerships. I follow Thaisa completely. If there's a fear factor in a bottom-up or top-down organization, because nobody is able to take a decision because it's led by fear, not by, let's say, human innovation, we are lost. And I'm feeling that every day, honestly speaking. We are working on a global implementation and the biggest roadblocks are fear. So you know, even we are going to sea level, for me, you know, it's all about the role model. It's about who's taking the, really taking the leadership. And it can be something in the middle. It can somebody, you know, from the ground who act as a role model. And this is, by the way, we are focusing also as a company, and our stakeholders and our shareholders, is to focus on these people that really makes a difference in these days. And I think if we are talking about legacy organizations, which are the big IT or ICT companies or whatever space they are, they have a huge issue to transform now. So let's try to help them as young, flexible initiatives. But again, we need them to make the enabling possible or to make the transformation finally executable. So Thaisa, I look forward also to talk with you further about this direction, because it's resonating all the time, every week, in the way we want to work and to want to make things done. So thank you for this important key point.
Thank you, Martijn, for jumping in with that. comment. I'd like to actually just also take us back to one of the points that Taisa had mentioned, because as she was saying it, I saw Mo sort of nodding in agreement, and I'd like to get your perspective. So at some point, Taisa had mentioned that, you know, there's a lot of technology, but not enough training. And this sort of brings up performance in my mind, but not just with regards to individual performance, also with regards to how individuals perform with technology in, say, a developmental humanitarian context, which I'm sure Velislava will also sort of agree with. It's one thing to get the tech into sort of the community where it's needed, but it's another thing for it to be properly adopted. It also takes me back to another comment Velislava made about ownership. And I'd like to sort of get some thoughts from you, Mo. How are, you know, from an ecosystem perspective, how are you thinking about building ownership? Building ownership at the community level, at the policy or decision-making level. How sort of are you thinking about that?
Well, thank you. And I do love what Taisa said and actually what Velislava said, and actually everybody said about this topic. Humans are at the center. I think we need to, if the first thing about really motivating people is to really give them a common understanding and a common goal, right? So if you're at the country level, it's really about this big national agenda. Usually what happens is you have the big national agenda, but it was co-created from the top. It's not something that's co-created from both the top and the bottom. So this applies in an organization as well. If you're going to motivate people, you have to make sure that they know where you're going, they know the journey, and you have to provide a safe space for them. Now, we have seen this safe space in different models. For example, they call them incubators, they call them labs, innovation labs, but a lot of that actually is creating more hype than necessary. Because what may happen is you may have a big tech who will say, oh yeah, we're gonna work with the small guy. So it's not about big tech, small tech actually, right? So it's about the partnership that you can really make sustainably with those stakeholders. And this never works because what happens is the power dynamics is usually tilted in one direction. If you want this to be sustainable, you have to have the right power dynamics that actually encourages and makes everybody benefit. Now, one thing that can really lead people to down the journey of innovation is what we call the power of stories. And, you know, so leader telling the story, leader over communicating. You know, if you go in a country, for example, and you say, you talk about big tech, small tech, well, we can say the small tech are the entrepreneurs because they're trying to create something, right? They're the one with the ideas. The big tech may be trying to, actually, they have a solution looking for a problem. On one hand, you have the small tech or the small guys looking to solve a real problem or not, actually it doesn't matter. But it's all about this collaboration. And it's about success stories that you can have either within your organization to inspire others to take the journey. Because if you don't have those success stories and the power of those stories, you're not gonna get there. At the end of the day, I think this is what I see as the biggest thing. And also providing that space, right? And let's be honest, not everybody is an innovator. In Silicon Valley, which is the most prolific, maybe 6% top of people are entrepreneurs, right? Or innovators. Everybody works for the entrepreneur, right? They're all happy, but what they know, and I've worked in Silicon Valley 18 years, so I know, what they know is that they know there is a certain culture, and these are habits that just there. You work from one company, you go to the next, everybody knows this is the next thing. Some people will never be entrepreneurs, right? But some people just have it in them. So we just have to make sure we can identify those change makers, we can empower them, and hopefully they can lead the others. And I am trying to say a lot of things in very short time, but at the end of the day, culture is about habits. Habits is about changing the habits, right? And if you know the book 7 Habits, the Habits Loop, you have your cue, you have your routine, and you have your reward. So if you're gonna change any habits in our ecosystem, in your company, you have to think about the cue, whether that's a leader pushing for somebody to make a change, or you have to think about the routine that people go into when they try to adopt these new habits, or you have to think about the reward, and the reward cannot be punishment. In hierarchical organization, yes. In other places, no. Back to you, Ilko.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Mo. Very, I think we've definitely gotten quite a lot of great contributions from all the different speakers. Just, you know, going over some of the key things, it's the individual at the center, where we're thinking about a tech/innovation ecosystem, but we need to think about it from many different dimensions, from the individual's well-being, but all the way to how the companies interact, all the way to how we sort of design from the beginning, sort of safe spaces. We have 4 minutes left, and I'd like us to do a little exercise. Nothing too much, don't worry, no one's gonna have to run around the living rooms. But in the last few minutes, I want everyone to just give us what your picture of the future, give us what your idea of the future is. I mean, a couple years ago, you know, we were all expecting flying cars in 2020. We're not quite there yet, but we're close. Personally, for me, I'm pretty excited about sort of 3D printing and blockchain, but 3D printing because of the opportunities that it offers for manufacturing, and also because of the opportunities that it offers for development. There's, you know, quite a few applications that you can have with 3D printing / additive manufacturing. So I'd just like to go around from speaker to speaker. Just very quickly tell us what sort of your idea of, or what your picture of the future will be. So maybe a couple years from now, people will look back and say, you know, this person said at the research forum that the future would look like this, and voila. I'll start, well, I see Tessa had her hand up, so I'll start with you, Tessa.
Well, thank you. I'm hopeful for the future because I see more and more companies focused on the tech for good. And that is, for me, the future, tech for good. You know, it's not only about performance, it's not about, you know, stakeholder, like how much you maximize turnover. It's really profitability. It's really about how we can enhance our human side and find this true connection, either through digital or in the physical world. And I would just give an example, and I want to talk about them because they're doing so much good. It's We Robotics, for instance. It's drone technology, but we should stop thinking that we know better. And I'll go back to what you say, Berislava, that we know better than the people who need things. Let's go back to what people need, ask them, and then bring them, you know, technology and make it sustainable. Let's stop thinking like the first world that we know everything. We don't. Actually, people don't have the same needs everywhere. Yeah, let's be global, but let's mostly be local. So I really think that tech for good is the future, and we should emphasize on that.
Thank you. And just building on that point, saying that people don't know anything, I'm hoping that I don't yet know that I'm a super innovator. I'm hoping I discover that very soon because it hasn't happened just yet. Over to you, Berislava. What's your picture of what the future would look like?
I'll start with the looking back rather than the future. I was reading a MIT technology review from the 60s where they said, what is the likely next 50 years for humanity? And they said the two likely trends that are going to be challenges are healthcare and food shortage. And they said, but surely by the early 2000 and 2010, we would have solved it with technology. I'm afraid to say with the current situations, we probably have not solved it yet, although probably in food, we might have a bit more progress than broader in the use of technology in health. But I hope that the future looks like we've learned the lessons that are being taught now through COVID and through the current situation we are in. And we've managed to not just create solutions, but really spend more time on mapping, spend more time on identifying ways for them to work in different contexts. And also, I think the future would only be possible if we have that understanding of solidarity and common responsibility. I think we need to understand that if it doesn't work for everyone, it doesn't work for us as well, because otherwise we are creating something that works in our context without really spending any effort for it to be anywhere else. And I think technology has the ability to scale things up, to optimize processes, and this should be used in a way that enables access of them for more people. So for me, would only be a success if we have coupled all of these advances in technology with advancing the access for everyone. So I don't want to pinpoint a one individual technology, but I really want to see much more innovations in the ways we use it, in the ways we fund it, in the ways we make it bring value. And hopefully that would be possible, and we won't have to face the same situation now as it was projected 50 years ago. That's for me.
Thank you, Velislava. I'll go over to you, Alain. What is
no, I agree with what was said, and I think what I see, my observation is that all the technology is there. I mean, obviously there are people very well placed to actually innovate, and they will come up with new things. I think the responsibility for the leadership of any organization is really to say, what is our purpose here? How are we going to harness this here and make it work together for whatever purpose you have, right? Depending on your government, an NGO, or your commercial company. And that's really, I think, the secret sauce here is really to align the technology with the organization capability, and be very conscious where you are as well, right? It's fine to set some ambitions, but realize that it's not with your ecosystem partners, it was with other people that you're going to be able to move. You're going to be able to move with your team. So the people you need to inspire first is really your team with your purpose. And then if you're able to inspire, the rest will come through from my point of view. Is it easy to do? No, it's very easy to say, but a few people realize it. I think that's the future. I think tech will evolve in its own way, and as we've seen this, and there are a lot of promises, but I think the tech is not the solution. Yeah, is more the human and the organization behind it.
Thank you very much, Alain. We'll go over to you, Mo.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to start with the quote of the inventor of 3M posted, which is Geoffrey Nichols. Actually, he did not invent it. He just could commercialize it better. But he basically say, research is the transformation of basically money into knowledge, and innovation is the transformation of basically knowledge into money, back into money. We live in a capitalistic world. Let's just be realistic. Money gets you different things, but it's not about money, but the innovation is core. And what I want to say is we have so much knowledge today with digital that we don't necessarily need to go create new type of money. We have open innovation, we're giving more knowledge. So what we need is innovation. And for us to deliver this innovation and this innovation gap, we have to mainstream digital ecosystem everywhere. And to do this, we can only do this through collaboration, and collaboration is back to humans. We have to start acting as humans.
Thank you, Mo. And now over to you, Martin, before we close this session.
I will try to keep it short, but I'm so inspired. Thanks, first of all, about this conversation. And I look forward, by the way, to continue. I hear a lot of common, let's say, sense, but also mutual understanding. And when Alan said it's purpose-driven leadership, and everybody can be a leader. So find it within yourself, in your soul. What can you do today to help somebody else? This is about the human capital that we all have, and you can act now. Imagination is important. Imagine that we live in a world that. I think it's important also to message that out to your team, to your friends, and to your business partners. I very strong belief, by the way, and this is focused also on our company, is in a revenue share environment. In the next 10 years, transformation will happen, and we will share, let's say, our cost and profit. So my belief on rolling out our ecosystem is based on that. Human capital, it's already said before, I really believe in that. That makes the difference. And therefore, we also built on our site a domain which is called athalos.world, where we invite global ambassadors to join our movement and to work on things that can be done today. I love what Mo said, a lot of things are there. Authorities are there, the finance instruments are there. But at the end of the day, what can we do together? And this is the handout to you all, by the way, to join any cooperation in the future between all of us. So I look forward to continue with you this conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for the insightful contributions, and also for bringing, your passion and enthusiasm to this discussion. We're 5 minutes over time, but I'm sure our participants enjoyed having you all. Thank you again. And to the participants, we'll be starting in 30 seconds. Bon après-midi, bonne soirée. Thank you.
Bedankt allemaal.
Bye.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Bye-bye.
So welcome back once again. And we had quite a good discussion in the first two panels, which brings us to the last panel, which is rethinking continuity from project financing to the future of work. And to those who are joining us, we have a very interesting panel here. We are joined here by Jeffrey C. from Singapore. I think you're joining from Singapore. And Jeffrey is the founder of Toast on Exchange. He's known to EU Business School. He's also an entrepreneur. He's written a lot of things and he does a lot of things with AI. So I will let him later introduce himself properly. We are also joined from Geneva by Peter Van Ham again. We collaborate a lot between EU Business School and Peter Van Ham, and he is the head of International Media Council and the chairman's communication at the World Economic Forum. And finally, from Zurich, we have Paul Müller, who is the head of health, security, safety, and environment at RUAG Space, which is the Swiss technology firm which produces equipments for space exploration, etc. So a couple of rules before we start this panel. What I want to do is I'll set the agenda, okay, and then I will direct a question at each of you, okay, but I want everybody to join in at one point. So I want this to be a discussion. I want this to be a debate. Please do feel free to disagree with each other, because that's what brings out the, let's say, the best ideas. Having said that, in this panel, we have about 40 minutes more, and I have a lot to discuss. We are discussing two distinct issues. The first is the issue of project financing, and that's due to the pandemic. And we see that a lot of, let's say, from FDI to development assistance, etc., they have been redirected towards national goals, and that has left kind of a vacuum and a competition for scarce resources in many parts of the world. So that's one aspect I want to talk about. And the second, which is probably the bigger aspect that I want to talk about, is the future of work. So that is basically, we'll be talking about automation and AI as well as robotics and how this is changing. And probably the pandemic has, proliferated this even at a greater speed. And what are the challenges we have, or what are the prospects we have regarding the future of work? So without further ado, I want to jump into the first question that I have, and I direct it to you, Paul Müller. You're from the industry, and you've seen throughout the pandemic a lot of changes probably that most industries have faced. So it's not particularly directed towards RUAG Space, but what has been your experience regarding continuity as well as financing or the future of work, given where you work? Paul, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Well, project finance and the future of work have a common core, of course, and these are our employees and the forward-looking attitude. I mean, project finance secures the financing and realizing of long-term projects. Some last more than 10 years. Being forward-looking is part of the DNA of project finance. Similarly, the future of work also starts now. In the face of black swan events like COVID-19, we're experiencing live which companies are prepared and already now have taken first steps into the future of work, for example, home office and collaborative. Both have also in common that on our way, new challenges and pitfalls will emerge, and one have to adapt agile. Back to you.
Thank you very much. I mean, you make a very good point in regards to the black swan events, and what we have seen, at least even in the previous panels, is the silver lining to this is, one is nobody had or even has probably, I can venture a guess, an idea regarding the future, and which means the prospects that we have, or the, let's say, the positives that we can take out of these black swan events, is that it gives an enormous room for innovative potentials that we are seeing from both big tech and small tech. So thank you for your response, Paul. I want to direct my second question towards Peter Barnum. Peter, talking about the pandemic, and we have seen, I mean, it started probably with the peak in China, and we saw supply shocks first in the global economy from the Chinese side. Later on, we had this demand shock, let's put it this way, from the rest of the world. And we are kind of in a recession at the moment. Now, this has led to a lot of, let's say, discourse, which kind of support the me first kind of theory, where countries are kind of tightening their purses, or you have trade wars, etc. So what sense do you make out of what's happening now and as we go into the future?
Well, it's anyone's guess, of course, what the future will bring, but we can look at what happened in the past and try to see if there's any lessons to be learned for the future. And I think one thing that you can see, and in a way, you could say that large parts of Asia, including China, they are a little bit like gazing into the future, right? So if you see at Q3, expected growth in China is again expected to be around 5%. Positive 5%, and for the full year, they will actually have completed this so-called V-shaped recovery. And so the lesson that you can take from countries like China, and I think countries like smaller countries like Singapore, New Zealand, and perhaps add in countries like South Korea, is that you can in fact do that. You can in fact return to growth. You can in fact return to full employment. But of course, you need to beat the pandemic first. And so that's what the focus really should really lie on. I think going forward for those countries that are battling a second wave of this pandemic, it ain't over until it's over. So that's the first big lesson that you can learn. And I hope that there's a second lesson that everyone will learn and will choose to learn, which is that, you know, we're better off fighting this event or this pandemic together. It won't be over for everyone and for anyone until it's over for everyone is another lesson you can draw. So those would be my two lessons from the past, if you say, and even from the recent past, if you look at the East in terms of what you can expect going forward.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I have a question, follow-on question to you, Peter, but everybody feel free to join in once Peter responds. Yes, we have to collaborate. We kind of are in a situation where no country, I think this was written even in the late 90s and early 2000s, the G0 world. I don't think there is any country or a group of countries that can lead such a global issue. So we need everybody to collaborate. One of the things that was mentioned in the last panel is we will see a return to buying local. So whether you're taking it from the perspective of industry in terms of jobs, buying local. Now, the issue I have with that is, yes, that sells probably votes, that's probably sustainable. On the other hand, what about value chains? And the second, and probably the more important question here is, with the buy local thing, I'm just trying to word this out. What happens to people who want still goods and services at a cheaper price, which scaling allows? So Peter, I'll forward this question to you, then I want Paul and Jeffrey to come into this debate.
Sure. I mean, so this is essentially a question about globalization and the future of globalization. And you know, of course, there's a reason why, you know, economies started to integrate in the first place. Where we are, both of us, I believe, are in Europe. You know, in Europe, after the war, economies started to integrate, not just because they could achieve better prices that way, but also because it would lead to a more peaceful economy and a more integrated economy and society. So if we're going to turn, and of course afterwards we've seen it on a global scale. So there was a rationale, there was an economic rationale, but there was also, let's say, a social and a political rationale to integrate economies more over time. Now people are turning away from that, and you know, first of all, you have to say, any country is sovereign. If anyone decides to turn away from another country, we can regret that, but that is a reality. I just hope that when people make their decisions about whether to buy local or turn away from globalization, that they do so knowing that there are other parts of globalization which we cannot run away from. If you look at climate change, I think a previous discussion also touched briefly on that. Climate change is a global issue inherently, right? If you look at the digital economy, the way we're speaking right now, many parts of the digital world, the digital economy are inherently global and connected. So if the point of getting away from globalization is simply that you want to close yourself off from the rest of the world, I don't think that that's a feasible option, even if you wanted to. And then, of course, if the goal was to get to better prices, I mean, that's economic theory that tells you that that's very unlikely unless you're a very large economy like perhaps China or the United States. So I'd say be careful what you wish for on that regard.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that response. Paul, can I get back to you on this point again?
Yeah, let me add something to that. I fully agree with Peter. And the main question is, how do we move forward in the way we live our lives at the moment? And I think business continuity is key in that point. I think that COVID-19 is teaching us this lesson. And this is not that the old normal topic like project finance get abandoned. But from my perspective, it is much more that we have to prepare to be more resilient in parallel. Rethinking starts with the working environment, especially in industrial traditional companies. We have to push into that direction. New collaborative tools, new ways to interact with customers without meeting them, and secure the value chain performance and liquidity are some of these examples. It is actually, let's say, a stretch in multiple dimensions. The one who acts decisively will gain competitive advantages.
Thank you. That was very insightful. Thank you so much for that response, Paul. Geoffrey, do you have any comments on, yes, we need to collaborate. It is a globalized world. We are all in this together, but at the same time, people want to go local. Okay, and that also means protectionism, etc. And also people want goods and services at a cheaper price.
Yeah, so I'm an entrepreneur by background, and one of the things that I've been looking at a lot, I'm not sure if it's as prevalent in Europe, is this concept of live stream selling. And I'm going to tie it to this question of globalization. So in the region, in Southeast Asia, a lot of people are going onto Facebook, they're popping on these channels, and they're kind of filming there, and people are walking in as if it's like a shop, right? They go in there, they ask questions like, oh, what items are you selling? And through like the video interface, people are actually buying from these people. The shops and the items can be in Thailand, the buyers can be in Singapore, and people are essentially making a trip down to Bangkok to purchase stuff through live streaming without ever having to step foot out of Singapore. So I raised this very interesting trend that we've been looking into and kind of playing around some ideas in that space for the reason that you have this situation where I think technology is taking us in a direction of greater integration, but politics and COVID-19 has resulted in significant borders and barriers going up. And I think this live stream trend is something that's very interesting because it just shows that when there is a consumer demand, there is a value proposition to the consumers, they find ways to work around some of these barriers that have been put up there. So I think the extent to which governments can control and limit the interactions is somewhat constrained today by technology. I mean, there are things that can be done. I think as we've seen in TikTok and all that, there are attempts to build these walls around technology. But there's always a fair bit of ingenuity and entrepreneurship that happens around breaking down some of these barriers.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey, for this insight. I'll come back to you. I have a lot of questions for you, probably a little later on. But having said that, in terms of we need probably more collaboration, and hopefully, as Peter pointed out, that hopefully we're in the right direction. Can all three of you give me some, from the industries you're from and the industries you work in, what are the prospects do you see? What are the, let's say, good points that you see coming out of the pandemic? So Paul, can we start with you?
Yeah, sure, no problem. I mean, overall, COVID has impacted space as well. Not as severely as other industries, but we had to introduce several measures in the beginning of the year, establish a business continuity plan in every operating country to continue being operational at all. And we had to cope with test centers or suppliers being shut down. So this had slowed things down, but overall we continue to operate. When it comes to business continuity plan, you just cannot lean back and send people home into home office and then say, okay, done. What you need to operate is a good leadership and a well-prepared employee. And I think what we have been discovered in the past months since the beginning is, especially when it comes to the topic home office, we've seen that we can be operational, that we can have success when we manage the teams in a way forward. And this is also gaining some questions in several companies, not only ours. I mean, we are renting big spaces in our countries, big land. The question could be, do we need these big buildings in the future anymore with the way of working, how we are doing it now, for example?
Thank you very much, Paul. That's very interesting in terms of rethinking our design, entire design of how we think about work in the first place, from the infrastructure side and even from the, let's say, coming to work, and rightfully so. As you pointed out, you cannot send people back home. So we will get to that discussion where I want to talk about the future of jobs and hence the future of work. So we will have some interesting discussions, hopefully, on that issue. Peter, any prospects going forward?
Well, you know, building on this perspective of the future of work and let's say living, first of all, you know, as you can see, I'm also right now in the home office, and I'm using a camera that I purchased and a microphone and so on and so forth. And that works, right? It works because right now we're dealing with a second wave of a pandemic, and we have no other choice than to work from home. I'm not so sure if we're going to see this as a permanent trend yet. I think a lot of people have discovered that they can work from home, and that for some tasks that they appreciate working in a quiet space, or that they appreciate, for example, if they have families, being able to manage both work and life simultaneously. Some other people, I think, find that a lot more difficult. And so I wouldn't yet draw conclusions. Personally, I wouldn't yet draw conclusions that are that far reaching in terms of where we're going to go. Having said that, you know, again, if you look at the historic picture, of course, there have been big shifts in where people worked from, in what kind of environment. And if you go back to the pre-industrial era, then, of course, in most cases, people worked and lived in the same place. Right, and that was quite literally in many cases. You had a living room, which at the same time was perhaps your bedroom and your workshop. So, you know, certainly humanity has adapted over time to different waves of industrialization and other evolutions that we've seen in the workspace, and no doubt it will happen again. And of course, we are seeing now that this teleworking. The fact that we are, let's say, communicating with each other through the internet and related technologies, that of course is here to stay. But if you look at the big ticket consequences that will have, imagine that we are going back to a place where you work and live in the same location. Well, then obviously, you know, you're going to have to see a shift that lasts over decades, right? Because I have the luck that I have a makeshift room that I can turn into a working space. Most homes, though, are not set up for that, right? So I'd say, yes, it can change the way we work and live. There have been big changes in the past, and there will be no doubt in the future. But let's not take this unique moment in time, these 6 months that have just passed, as sort of the determining factor of how things will be going forward.
Thank you, Peter. Definitely, we should not probably take this as the unique period, and that the new world would be completely different. Yes, I personally, I would agree with that statement that we should be cautious about where we're going. However, it has opened a lot of possibilities, and those possibilities can be has a domino effect on or domino effect in terms of the applications. So here you mentioned something very important, and I want to take the discussion in a different direction. So with this pandemic, working from home, Paul, you also mentioned in terms of infrastructure, do we need these big offices, the expenses, moving people here and there, which can be, you can use technology to leapfrog those issues. Therefore, Geoffrey, I want to come to you and ask you, since you have done a lot of work on the future of work, and I've been privileged to read some of your articles and your thoughts in that matter. Do you think we need to rethink jobs, first of all? And the follow-on question would be, if you're talking about the future of work, which is basically automation, robotics, and AI proliferating into the workforce and etc., are they going to take over jobs, or do you think they're going to enhance basically or assist us in doing something? So the first question is jobs. Do we need to rethink the way we do things? And the second is probably how do you see this transition where technology will proliferate in most aspects of our human activities?
Yeah, I think kind of before we think even about AI and its impact on us, I feel more immediately that the trends I'm looking at that I'm most interested in is, and something that was discussed by both Paul and Peter, is the question of remote work, right? Is it here to stay? What are its implications? And I think there are vast implications if it becomes a long-term trend. So, I think I'm a big fan of remote work. Previously when I was doing Choose on Exchange, which I have the good fortune of working at the EU Business School, we have, our volunteers, our team have always worked remote. We've scaled it up to almost 200 volunteers, all working remotely at some points, and it has worked for us. And then during the pandemic, I had to transition my team at the AI startup I'm working at across 4 markets to a remote work environment. And we find that it works for us. I think there are things that we have to change, we have to adapt to. But what we have found is that the experiment generally has proven that if it's synchronized across the organization, we can do it fairly well. So I believe that remote work will stay with us. I don't think it will be for every company, for everyone, but I think it will be a much larger part of the way we interact. And I think kind of then this kind of was the second order implications for all of us, right? I think on the worker side, I think in terms of how we build company culture is going to look very different. There's much more thought, I think, given to time zones, to asynchronous communication, to kind of even changing where we choose to live. And I think that separation between, I think the communities we choose to live in, the places we choose to live in and work, I think we no longer have to, in a sense, make that distinction, right? I think very often people say, oh, I want to go to the valley because the good jobs are there. But that doesn't necessarily mean their community is in the valley. And now with the pandemic, we are seeing that people are asking to relocate to places where they actually want to be in because they can still retain the jobs that otherwise they would have to forego if they were in those locations. So I think that is going to change the urban landscape a fair bit. I think it's implications for things like project financing, for the kind of houses we choose to live in, where we choose to live in, taxation for government. And I think that's kind of a very, very big trend that we are seeing. I think technology is an enabler of all of this, right? I think the fact that we're doing this conference through Zoom, we're not having all these issues with lag time and poor sound quality and all that is, so I think that it ties in together in the sense that all this technology is enabling that shift. And I think it's it's a trend that's here to stay for us.
Thank you very much. And could you shed some light in terms of the, let's say, when we talk about the future of jobs, when you're looking at technology as a great enabler, plus technology scales really well, right? So you can bring in, let's say, my background is in development studies and international affairs. With technology, you can, countries or let's say communities can leapfrog certain stages of development and not go through the same way that, for the last 200 years of industrial revolution has shown us. So having said that, would you, where do you stand on, let's say, automation, robotics, or AI? Is it going to be taking jobs away, or do you think this is going to be what you call enhancing the way we do things? Because I want to come back to this idea of jobs. So when we think about the future, looking at this pandemic, so should this be the main message that, let's say, politicians who always speak about jobs, we need to create more jobs? Is this the only way we can think about economic growth?
Yeah.
That's
so
where I'm
I think I think there's a few different angles, right? I think the impact, when you talk about the impact of technology, is going to be very different based on industries. In some areas, it's an enabler. It's going to help people sell better. It's going to help people in some countries sell more to other locations. So some places would benefit from it. And then in other places, it's going to have potentially kind of a replacement effect. So I'll take a kind of a much more micro example, right, to say kind of how these trends play out at that level. So, you know, I mentioned the live stream selling experience, and, you know, I'm seeing all these channels pop up where someone in Bangkok is selling, you know, pretty interesting clothes from Bangkok to Singapore through a video channel. And what I started to notice is some of them start doing this blended experience. So you go from a shopkeeper explaining things, putting on the clothes, showing the different designs, and then she starts splicing in videos, pre-recorded videos of different product items. So she's using technology there as an enabler, right? She's selling better, she knows her audience, but she's automating part of the process in terms of like showing the different products and all that. So I think in that sense, if you say like, if I look at the example, I say technology is an enabler. Are there places where it will become a self-serve model where people are shopping through a bunch of pre-recorded videos? That can also happen. So I think, you know, basically we're going to see different kinds of effect based on how the human ingenuity and how we choose to use these technologies.
If I can come in there, Sudha, I think that's really an interesting way of looking at the future, isn't it? And the future of work also, which is to say you get now an opportunity to see, because it's forced almost, we have to make this leapfrog forwards. And we get an opportunity to see what works and what doesn't, right? I mean, like if you make the analysis after today, you know, for example, 3 times more people attended this conference because it was organized online than when it was organized in person, then that's a positive reason to keep operating this way. Of course, if you would come to the conclusion that, you know, only as many people showed up and they really only showed up because there was no opportunity to attend in person, then I don't think that's the future of this conference. And I think we can replicate that if we look at the future of work. The example that Jeffrey talked about, I think is a really nice one. I see it myself, some traditional retailers that I know, small enterprises, they are now forced to experiment with what you said, online selling, teleselling, and etc. I see some people having good success with it. For example, I know somebody who's now selling shoes through Facebook. Perfect. And it turns out that, you know, let's say it could become he has 5 shoe stores. It has become sort of a 6th shoe store, if you will. It won't replace his 5 shoe stores. Right? Maybe he'll scale down to 3 shoe stores or 4 shoe stores, but he'll definitely keep the brick and mortar, and he'll add another channel, which will be his Facebook selling, where there'll be a full-time employee in that. So I think that's a better way to look at it than to say, you know, from now on, here on forward, we live in the post-corona era, and now everything, all jobs will change, and they will change forever. I think it's more a gradual thing, and we get an opportunity now to learn.
I need to add something to that as well, and it goes a bit into the direction what Geoffrey was saying when it comes to the future way of work. It's not my saying people can work in home office forever. No, definitely not. But we have to understand that not every company is made for that, because the companies before COVID, they worked in a traditional way. And I told already, when it comes to meeting new customers, the question is how we are going forward meeting customers online. I mean, it's totally different when you have the customers around the table here, when you have them on the video channel. Another big point is when it comes to the IT environment in the companies. You know, some of the industrial companies, they use different IT, different software, different systems. somebody's allowed to use Zoom, somebody's not allowed to use Zoom. So this we all have to take into account when it comes to the future way of work. I mean, we also discovered as a company some IT disruptions because when you send the majority of people into home office, which can work from home, then you overload basically the VPN and the system. So that's the way we also have to think when it comes to future way of work for all the companies, not only industrial or office companies, every company.
Thank you very much. Jeffrey, Peter, do you want to respond to or have a comment on that issue? Because we have a question from the audience. Otherwise, we can move to the question.
Yeah, I think I'll touch very briefly on this. I think Paul raised a very good point around like the transition to remote work is not just everyone go back and get on your Zoom and talk on Zoom, right? There's such strong cultural elements and org design elements that goes into like all these reinforcing pieces that defines the company. And then when you start changing that process, it has to be quite well thought out. So I talked to, like, for example, one of the Facebook hiring managers, and they're telling me now as they think about shifting half their workforce into remote work, they're saying that they actually have as one of the managerial skill sets they are looking for, people who have experience with remote work alongside domain or functional expertise, because they are looking at it from a very holistic manner. Like, how do we think about compensation for people who then move into different areas? How do they collaborate? Who gets input into decision making? Because some people are on site talking to senior management, some people are off site. So there's just so many elements that goes into that transition is definitely not easy.
Thank you so much for the explanation. We just have one question from the audience for the moment. I'm just going to read it out, and this is to all three. Just jump in, and then we move on to the second. We don't have that much time, but I definitely want to discuss something else with the panelists. So the question is, do you believe that the supply chain should become more automized, as it would make trade more efficient in combination with faster transportation methods? Does anyone want to take that up? Should supply chains become more automized?
I mean, very briefly, maybe from my side,
yeah.
I don't think that automation or manual work are goals in themselves very often. And this, I think, is particularly true. And if anyone feels differently, they should jump in. But I think this is particularly true for something like supply chain. Supply chain has a pretty defined function, which is to get things from point A to point B, or from a raw state to a finished state. And so that's your goal. That's the goal. And whichever way you can best achieve that, most efficiently achieve that, I think you should go for it. And so that's not a philosophical question for me between humans and robots at that point. I think there's other places where that discussion becomes much more relevant. For example, in the care economy, I would philosophically believe that you should never replace human care by robotic care. But in a supply chain, I don't see that same moral dilemma.
I have to add something to that. Fully agree with Peter on that. You can automate the supply chain until a certain point of view, but in the whole supply chain in an industrial company, you have your critical suppliers, you have your stock level, you need to maybe additional purchase of product to build up your stock, and you have your transportation concept. So the automatization of supply chain only works for maybe some companies, but let's don't forget the human factor in all these parts. A machine is doing the job which the machine is programmed for, but the humans can still better react to failures within the supply chain as a machine.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, I think I just want to echo Paul's point. I think just kind of, and I hate to harp on this live stream selling thing, but I'm drawing a lot of very interesting lessons in parallel there, right? So I think this is at the end of the supply chain. But I was puzzling for a long time when I started watching all these channels, like why do people spend like 30 minutes to an hour of their precious time watching one of this live stream instead of just going on e-commerce site and finding a product and buying it right away? It was so much simpler and fast and efficient. And when we interviewed a lot of the buyers, they told us that they just wanted to talk to a human being. They wanted to ask questions, they want to get a response, and they want to interact with someone. And I think back of all the times where I used like a food delivery service or kind of a, an on-demand driving service like Grab or Uber. And there was a problem and I call customer service and I keep being redirected over and over to all these different channels because no one knows how to intervene in the system to solve a problem.
Right.
And the frustration of that. And it just makes me cherish the human experience a lot more.
Definitely. I mean, I spend probably less time to go to the shop when I need to buy jogging trousers than buying it online somewhere.
Yeah, I think all the time I save using these services, I spend complaining on customer service to try to reach the right person.
True. I mean, we all have different perspectives on this, definitely. But I think most of us agree, at least in the panel, that yes, we do have a momentum towards remote work in certain industries, in certain cases. Peter, you mentioned in certain cases it works. And if it works, it works better in certain situations. Probably this is the way to go. Now, which brings us again, technology, and I'm using technology as the umbrella kind of thing for, let's say, automation, internet, let's say AI, etc. Is that going to lead to more socio-economic polarization? So that is one thing we need to think about, particularly coming out of the pandemic. Okay, since many of the what you call the development aids, financial assistance, etc., sustainable development goals, they have taken kind of a beating. So are we going to see more winners and losers? So those who can apply technology, those who have access to that, they are going to be winners. And so we're going to see a bigger polarization in the global economy. Peter.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and I hate to repeat myself. I guess if I repeat myself, you'd be able to replace me with a robot. So I shouldn't do that too often. But again, if you look at history, you actually see that this has happened over time, right? So over time, we've had waves of technological innovation that have indeed led to increased let's say, inequality, and as a consequence of that, increased polarization in society, and have also led, by the way, to let's call it dehumanization of workers, right? So this is the whole story. I think you can read a couple of German economists of the turn of the century around that have did quite impactful work on that, and so I think we're seeing that again, right? We're seeing again a wave of technology that's coming at us that is indeed going to allow certain advances, but where certain people and certain companies are definitely better placed to reap the benefits of that, and others will not be able to do so to the same extent. And so typically what's the way out of that is either you wait for another wave of technology that actually counters that force, or, which I think is more is a better solution, is you have, of course, a political reaction to that and a government reaction to that, where society as a whole makes a choice and say, that's a choice we make, we don't want that. So by design, we would like to go against this inherent effect of technology to create inequality and polarization. And so you'll have to, I think, you'll have to see the regulators step in, you'll have to see the government step in, and so on and so forth. And I think that increasingly technology companies themselves are starting to understand that will be necessary for their own benefit and that of society as a whole.
Thank you very much, Peter. I do agree with you, and we do have evidence in the past about, let's say, technological proliferation, and which leads to inequality, etc. There's a slight probably difference today where some of the challenges that we have, which are more, let's say, global and collaborative nature. So if you take the Sustainable Development Goals, etc., which probably we didn't have goals like that for common humanity, let's say 100 years back, they take kind of a backseat. So that's where I'm trying to go at. So we don't have that much time. So I have the last question to all of you. So when we rethink work and where we're moving in terms of rethinking jobs, and jobs being the primary driver of economies, etc., at least that's what's promised by politicians, do you see any benefit in schemes and systems such as the universal basic income? So is that the way, I mean, is that a new way of looking at why don't we provide minimum sustenance to people whether they contribute anything to the society or not. Okay, and that takes care of the minimum this thing, so they can focus their energies and everything else on innovative solutions. So where do you stand on that, moving in future continuity and how we rethink jobs and work?
Very briefly from my side, I think you can call it universal basic income, you can call it social security, you can call it anything you like. But I think that yes, over time you've seen that when society has made that choice to make sure that there's let's say a minimum level of subsistence for the people, that is beneficial for society as a whole. And of course, there's moments in time when there's more need for that, and there's moments in time when there's less need for that. And it very much seems to be the case that right now we need more of that. So I would be in favor as a principle.
As a principle. Thank you very much, Peter. I know, there's a lot of literature. I've not read all the literature on universal basic income, but I've read the works of Philippe van Parijs, who's written a lot, Belgian, yes, who's written a lot on the UBI. Now, one of the fears, one of the criticisms of the UBI, and maybe Paul and Jeffrey, you can come in here, is it is actually going to lead to more inequality. So let's say bigger corporations, etc., they are going to get a bigger chunk because it's the kind of an economy that we have created. You give people money and they'll be spending on those particular consumer goods, which make those corporations even bigger. And hence the inequality is going to extend even more. So do you think such schemes will work in the future?
Yeah. Maybe I can go first. So I can't say I know a lot about the literature of UBI and the implications from any real life experiments that's been done on it. Although I think we are in that period where we are testing it out, right? We are actually seeing a lot of UBI-like policies being done. But I think I just want to echo Peter in that I believe that some form of redistribution is needed because we're heading towards very heavy capital concentration. I think tech is a part of a drive of that trend. You think about, say, a company that manages to automate driving. Drivers get put out. The people who control the capital would kind of control the industry, right? Because now you just build self-driving cars and the cars take people from point A to point B. And I think that redistribution is needed. I don't see it as an argument that people would spend on products from these companies because these are the companies that are being taxed to pay for that redistribution. So I'm very much in favor of it.
I'll keep it simple and short. When it comes to rethinking of business continuity and stuff like this, I just repeat myself again and just can tell the industrial and traditional companies, they have to rethink their work environment at the moment, and only when they have these stretch in these multiple dimensions, then those companies who act decisively, they will gain the competitive advantage.
Thank you very much for all your insights. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I would have loved to discuss more issues on continuity and the future work with all three of you. So once again, the panelists, thank you so much for joining us and for collaborating with the EU Business School and on research. I hope to see you and collaborate with you in the future in different projects and different events. The audience, thank you for joining us again, and please do not leave us. We have the closing statement from our Vice President and Managing Director, who will join us in 30 seconds. So panelists, thank you once again. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Well, thank you very much, Shuda. Thank you very much for organizing this event. I would, before closing, give my big thanks, first of all, to all the panelists. It has been refreshing to listen and hear to all of you, but also a big shout out to the research team of EU Business School. Dr. Shuda Chakravarti, Ugo Ikpeatsu, Margarita Pugash, who you have not seen today, but has been doing all the technical, has been on the backside and doing all the technicalities, and Dr. Ailinova, who has been assisting Margarita as well with all the technicalities. The goal of EU Business School and the On Research is to offer a platform for experts to be able to discuss and exchange. And we would really like to see this more in the future. And the panel that has been set up today and this conference that has been set up today is really the start. And we would like to continue those discussions individually with different people in audience, or even with the different panelists, and potentially have joint programs, joint research together. I think that will be fantastic if we could come to this outcome. Obviously, I'm an eternal optimistic. So I always look about the goods. I think the last 6 months have been a tremendous booster for creativity of the audience, of the people in general. We have seen tremendous change. We have also seen how the population has been resilient. We have seen that the world has been totally connected. But at the same time, while we have been, Dr. Sitaraman was referring to a global economy, fully connected. I think at the same time that we have never been as distant from each other. It is so difficult to travel from one country to another, all the restrictions that are in place. So technology is bringing us all together, but we are lacking this social aspect. The human is a social animal. And we need it. We have seen it in the past. We have been in lockdown for several months or several weeks, and the cases coming up again, at least in Europe, is a demonstration that there is this social aspect that is really important. We're speaking about. I have heard a lot about change, but I think it's really this new normal that we will need to work with, that we will need to adapt to, and that this virus is not gonna get away anytime soon. People were expecting, well, we have been kind of, how to say, we have been kind of driven by short deadlines, but I think now clearly the politicians and the world experts clearly mentioned that before June 2021, if not beyond that, we will not have a new normal in place. And we count on the resilience of all the people. We count really on this creativity, because we read a lot about people suffering, not only in terms of deaths, but also in terms of businesses, in terms of economy, people clearly suffering out of that. But at the same time, it has been a tremendous change in terms of pace and in terms of creativity boosting. How many restaurants were not doing takeout, and now suddenly all the restaurants can do that, thanks to the technology that have been put in place, the Uber Eats, the Eats.ch, Smooth, or any application that is more common in the country you are. But those are clearly examples of the creativity that comes out. So we are there, EU Business School, with the research team to clearly assist you in terms of research projects, in terms of collaborations. If you want to challenge us, if you want to work on specific projects, we have a pool of talents that are here to work with you. So don't hesitate to reach out to us. And I would like to thank all the audience, because we have had an active audience of over 100 people attending this conference. So we're really proud of that. And I see you soon. Thank you very much.